Good morning. It's the weekend. How's everything going? Getting your kids ready for practice, for religious services, family fun day? Are you alone and relaxing, running errands? Well, no matter what you're doing, I'm glad you're here for today's edition of Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green. Today we're here to discuss unaccompanied refugee minors, kids that have come into this country for many reasons, and they're alone. So we're not here to discuss the political issues of the border or immigration, but to discuss how one key organization with services in 5 New England states, a big office in Worcester, are helping these kids with support services. And there continues to be a need for people willing to foster these often scared but very appreciative children that are in our country and can and have gone on to be incredible contributors to their community. So I have 3 people in the studio with me today. I'm so excited, that are all involved with the Centria Care Alliance. So we have Ailish Donovan, who's Centria's Senior Program Manager for the Unaccompanied Refugee Minors and Division of Children's Services Program. Good morning.
Good morning.
And we have Colleen Schroth, who's the Recruitment and Retention Specialist at Centria. Good morning.
Good morning, Vicki.
And a current foster mom of 3 unaccompanied immigrant children, Alyssa Bongiorno. Welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you all for taking time out today. And I know the need is great for foster parents across the board. And we're talking about kids that are coming here unaccompanied from far and wide. So, Ailish, according to the most recent data that I've read, and correct me if I'm wrong, the majority of unaccompanied minors come from Central America. I think they call it the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Actually, in a smaller amount from Mexico than I would have thought when I looked at the data. But you also have children coming from Burma, Sudan, Somalia. So what happens when the difference between how do the kids come to Centria that come into this country by crossing the border on foot versus flying over?
Well, the Unaccompanied Refugee Minor Program began in the early 1980s as a response to the Vietnam and Laotian wars. And so originally this program was set to serve children who were overseas refugees, and they'd been designated as refugees from the United Nations Higher Commission on Refugees. As refugees and as unaccompanied, meaning that they it's been determined that there's nobody else to care for these kids. So kids that are coming over from overseas countries, they are often living in a refugee camp, and they are identified as unaccompanied, as I mentioned, and
Is that through Homeland Security, or how does that happen?
it's through many organizations,
Okay.
many different organizations. It starts with United Nations of Higher Commission on Refugees, UNHCR. Once it's determined that the child will travel to the United States, then the Department of State gets involved, and Department of Homeland Security is involved as well.
Okay, so everyone sees the pictures of these refugee camps, and there are thousands of kids, and you can't possibly, no one in this country can serve all of those kids out of one organization like Centria. So how do these kids how do you find out about them in these refugee camps where there's many, many kids?
Well, we, as some people may know, we used to be known as Lutheran Social Services, and we have since changed our name to Centria, but we are still very much tied to our national agency, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, and we receive referrals from Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services about kids who are living in refugee camps, who may have crossed the border. So we're getting referrals from our national agency.
And they have to, obviously, do they have to go through the visa process before they fly over here? Or when they get here?
Yeah.
Or okay.
So kids who are coming from overseas are designated as refugees prior to coming to the United States. They go through a significant amount of background checks and designations before they actually set foot here in the United States.
Okay, so then let's talk about those kids from Guatemala. We're hearing this in the news all the time, and you guys see it firsthand when they get here. Some of these kids that come to Centria, and by the way, when I went and looked at the state website, you guys are the immigrant, unaccompanied minor immigrant organization that the state goes to, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, there's a lot of services in a lot of communities, but the state goes through you very often for through DCF, Department of Children and Families, for this. So let's talk about those kids. Like I read about Maria from El Salvador, which we can talk about later, who came through your organization. But it's a typical example, and this was a sex trafficking issue. But she came, had abuse in her family. She came to the border. She crossed the border alone with smugglers. And then, they said, you don't have to pay us up front. We'll smuggle you across. But then she gets across the Mexican border, coming all the way from where she came from. And the smuggler said, well, now you're going to work for us because we need you to pay back the money that you didn't pay us for smuggling you. So she did. And then she eventually, somehow they got arrested. And she came in through the program and through Accentria and is doing very well. So because I'm sure there's misconceptions, how do kids, what are some of the ways they get across the border? And when they get across the border and they're met with ICE or whatever organization it is, how do they get legal immigration status?
Okay, so first, how do kids get across the border? Kids travel in a multitude of ways. They travel on foot. They travel via car. They travel on the train, which is known as La Bestia.
La Bestia?
Yeah.
Does that mean the beast?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a regular train?
Yeah, it's a train that goes through primarily Mexico that is, carrying a lot of different things, but the kids will
jump on it.
Top.
On top?
It's an extremely dangerous endeavor, but kids are fleeing really scary things at home, so this is just seen as a way to get out.
See, it sounds like a movie, but this isn't a movie.
And this
is real life.
Documentaries and movies about it.
Yeah. Colleen had mentioned that to me before the show. Yeah.
Right. So kids are traveling in pretty scary ways, and if they do make it through the journey, they get to the border, and there's a lot of different ways that they cross, but some just simply cross and they ask for help when they get it and they get there. That's really.
So do they come through a security checkpoint, or
they can? So there's a lot of different nuances. For example, kids that are coming from Mexico, they will often be turned away because they're from Mexico, and the United States and Mexico have an agreement. Whereas you have
has that been going on for a long time?
A long time.
Okay, just to make that clear, no politics involved in here.
No,
that hasn't
it's just
changed.
simple. It's just simple. A neighboring country
Right.
is going to have an easier time of working with that other country to say, hey, so-and-so showed up here. We're going to have to, where's their family? Let's figure out what's going on. But you have kids that are coming from 3 countries away.
Right.
That's a whole different story now. Right.
Right. So now there are. How do they prove? First of all, aren't there 3 and maybe more different? Without getting too too detailed.
Right.
There's 3 different basic ways that they can get in. One is human trafficking. One is asylee. You explain it to me because I've read it. There's 3 different ones. It is, but I want people to understand that these are the ways that the kids are legally come into this country.
Yeah, there are. We're not going to get into it too much for Sunday morning, but first we have refugees, right? So these are kids that are in refugee camps. They get designated as a refugee overseas before they get to the United States. Second is asylee. They get to the United States. They're determined to be asylees once they're here. Third is the special immigrant juvenile, meaning that they come here. Typically, they cross the U.S.-Mexico border. It's identified that they've been abandoned, abused, neglected.
How do they identify that? Seriously. Investigators have to from the State Department?
Right.
Wow.
Right. It's in the court. A court in the United States, whatever town or city that they're in, has to find that they've been abandoned, abused, or neglected. And so an attorney has to come in with evidence. And if there's parents that are still living, they have to be served in that home country. It's a significantly long process.
So what happens to these kids at the border, which is what we're seeing? Are they staying in these essentially a refugee camp?
They could be staying in different places. I can't really speak to that too much. It's not really my expertise, but I think, as I was saying before, many kids are repatriated back home. If it's determined that they can go back home, then that is what happens. Secondly, it's, okay, is there anybody here in the United States who can take care of you? Who can sponsor you? Is there family, friend, aunt, uncle, cousin? And then, people are doing due diligence to make sure that's a safe place for them to go. So that also takes some time. And third, there's a small percentage of kids where there simply isn't anybody here to take care of them, and that's where a program like ours comes into play. Long-term foster care for kids.
Colleen, can you explain the services that Centria Care Alliance offers, and more specifically, how do they place children? How many children? Are they more girls and boys, more boys and girls?
Yes, so we do have about 150 kids in the program right now. That number does fluctuate, and the primary countries of origin right now for those kids would be Guatemala and Eritrea, which is the country in the Horn of Africa that we're seeing.
So they're
a lot
flying,
of kids
obviously.
From. Yeah, so those are those overseas refugees we talked about. So those kids would, once they arrive, come into service of our program. Ideally, they would go into foster care services for these kids. But of our 150 kids, we only have 55 of them that are actually living in foster care. So we do provide other service other than foster care.
Like a group home?
Yes, yep. So we have group homes and other residential care facilities that aren't necessarily operated by Centria, but that we partner with. And then there are also the older kids that we've worked with and to help them become independent, and they would transition into an independent living arrangement or a pre-independent living where they're getting a lot of assistance from our case managers, whether that be financial or health or mental health services, but they would be living in their own apartment or maybe living on a college campus.
So what we haven't talked about is that kids can range in your program from age 4.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't
22?
say it's a range because it's very
It's mostly
rare.
it's mostly 17 to.
Yep, it's mostly between the ages of 17 and 18, but they do not emancipate from the program until they're 22. So when they turn 18, they can volunteer themselves to continue receiving services, which many of them choose to do because they have huge educational gaps, a lot of financial needs, and they definitely really rely on our program for help. So yeah, they stay in the program until they're 22, and they can even apply for an extension at age 22 if they're not ready to be fully independent. They can apply for an extension of 6 months to a year and stay in the program until they're 23.
So explain what happens. You get a call, a referral from where?
We get referrals from Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, LIRS.
Okay, which is national.
Yes.
Okay. So then you get the call, and what happens? I mean, are there? I should back up for a minute. You said 55 foster parents, and the rest are receiving other services. Is that because you don't have enough foster parents?
It's a balance. So some of our kids have a higher level of need. Maybe they're having a lot of behavioral challenges that a foster family isn't necessarily able to manage. So we would refer them to a group home because there is a staff person there who's trained to deal with those certain types of behavioral needs. So sometimes it is need-based, but sometimes if we receive a referral and we don't have a foster home with an available bed, we want to still be able to assure that kid into our program and make sure that they have a safe placement. So if a group home or another placement has an open bed, better than nothing, right? So
Absolutely.
Sometimes they'll be put into a placement just to make sure that they receive service from our program.
Okay, so we're going to get to Alyssa in a minute, who's going to tell us all about the realities of doing this.
Yes.
And why she's doing that as she laughs, but she does it, and she and her wife do it. These kids come here, and I'm assuming, do any of them know English?
Some of them. It depends on the country of origin. So a lot of our kids from Central America do not. They speak primarily Spanish. Some of them may not even speak Spanish. There are certain communities in really rural parts of, say, Guatemala that have their own dialect, so they don't even speak Spanish. But for some overseas kids more often, they might have had like a little bit of English in their schooling in their past. And then there even are a few countries where English is commonly spoken in the community. So it really varies from kid to kid what kind of English language level that they have.
Okay, so for people listening, we're talking to folks from Centria Care Alliance who has services in all 5 states, but they're unaccompanied, make sure I get this right, refugee minors.
Yes.
They service foster and placement for these children we're talking about in Massachusetts today, but they do have services in New Hampshire that are a little bit different. And you're in dire need of foster parents. I mean, every organization is, and you're fighting against. I mean, you're fighting for time and people that are looking at fostering. Because everybody, the Department of Children and Families needs foster.
Right.
Families. So, and in yours, I would imagine these folks have to really be able to think about, can I do this? Can I handle this? So you're saying the typical age is 17 and 18. So what's the length of stay with a family? Well, first of all, what does a family have to do? Because again, we're going to get to Alyssa, but what does a family, it's not like they come here, they run a background check on these families and they're done. Right. I mean, it's a very lengthy process.
Yes, yeah, and right now it's probably taking at least 6 months to become a licensed foster parent. And foster parents do need to be licensed. So the first step would be just to chat with me, right, and just make sure that you meet those basic qualifications, such as being 25 or older, being a resident of Massachusetts for our particular program.
You don't have to own a home, though, right?
Correct. Yep. You can rent your home. You can be single, married, divorced. We don't discriminate based on sex or your sexual preference. So we're very open when it comes to those things. It really just comes down to, being 25 or older and a resident of Massachusetts and being able to show that you have the flexibility in your schedule to do this. So we'll assess those things throughout the process, but even just an initial phone call to me, we can kind of work those things out.
And a 6-month process isn't to scare people away.
Not at all. So it's really just because it takes time. And so after an initial inquiry, you would fill out a physical application.
Which you can get on your website, which we'll give out at the end.
Yep. Yeah. So we have a written application, and a background check, like the Corey that you mentioned. And then after that, we do have a training. It's called the Massachusetts Approach to Partnership in Parenting. We just call it MAP because that's a mouthful.
Okay, that one's easy. UHRC and all these other ones are not.
Yes, so that is the training that we use, and it is 30 hours of training. So we typically do it 4 Saturdays in a row, and we do offer it through our offices, and it happens a few different times a year, so we would connect you with a training. And then the last and arguably the most lengthy part of the process is the home study. So that is when a case manager that you'll work with throughout this process.
For the foster parent, right?
Yes.
The kids have another case manager, as I was explained before we got on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we call it a family resource coordinator. So that family resource worker is really there in the corner for that family throughout the process, and even once they have a youth placed in their home. You're working with that person. You really get to know that person. We have people joke like they know me better than my best friend, because they're going to really get to know you in that home study, which is that last part of becoming licensed. So they'll visit your home at least 4 times, interview you, your spouse, your partner, and any other members of the family living in the home. So that will definitely take a long time. There's at least 4 visits to your home involved in that. And, coordinating those schedules alone can be tricky because you have to make sure that the worker can get to you, that you and your partner can be available for that. It definitely takes some significant time. And those interviews aren't just to see if you're a safe person. Those interviews are to really get to know your family and understand the dynamics in your household, understand your strengths as a family and what you bring to the table. And that way we can decide what type of youth would best fit in your home. So that's the point of the home study. It's not to scare you. It's to really understand your family and understand what kind of a youth would be a fit for you guys and make a lifelong connection possible.
So if you have 55 placements, people don't have to be married, right? They can be single.
Nope.
They can
single, unmarried, divorced, etc. Yep.
Okay.
We do have single parents that are foster parents on their own.
Can you have other kids in the home too?
Yes. Yep. That's up to your discretion. You do have to have available bedroom space.
Yep.
And they can only share a room if they're an appropriate age to share a room. So if you have a 4-year-old at home and they would need to share a room, they couldn't share a room with a 15-year-old because that's a totally different stage of life, right? So, if you do have a 4-year-old that has their own room, and you have another available bedroom where the 15-year-old can stay, then that is a possibility as long as you feel like that 4-year-old would be happy to have a new foster sibling in the home.
All right, so speaking of what foster parents need to do, let's switch this over to Alyssa. you've done this for a while, but you currently, and God bless you, you and your partner you don't have children living with you. Your partner has adult children, you said, that don't live
Correct.
in your house.
Correct.
Okay, but you have 3 immigrant girls.
3 girls, yeah.
What are their ages?
17, 21, and 19.
Oh, wow. 17, 19, 21. Okay. Did they all come together?
Nope. They, none of them are biologically related.
Okay.
They all come from different countries, one from Guatemala, one from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and one from Eritrea. And then we've had 2 other Somali girls that have gone into independent living.
Right, and we were talking about that. And before we get into the details, I mean, tell me the story of the one that you were telling us before we went on the air. These kids come here because they see the United States as a place for hope. And these kids they work hard. And you had one that especially, you were telling me about this girl that has gone on to be so successful, and she came here. And how did you start with her? Or how did, actually, let's back
She was
up.
our second placement in the home, and you know, her language was her English was very remedial, but she was a little older and did not want to spend 4 years in high school, because when she came, she would have been placed in the freshman year at high school, and it was just too long. So she, you know, with her maturity, proved to her caseworker and to us that she was really able to do the high set, which is the GED program. But she was, you know, super determined. You know, she would study 6, 7 hours, 8 hours a day.
And she went to an English, to the immigration school in
So
Worcester?
there's a Worcester public school called the New Citizen School, which kids who coming into the country that don't have any real language ability yet will spend time in that school and then get placed into one of the home high schools once their language skills are at a certain level. She opted to go right into the GED and was successful with it. And it's not the right fit for every kid, but she made it work. And during that time, she got her CNA license, and now she's at Quinsigamond Community College and working and in independent living, you know.
And that must make you feel
It's
great.
Fantastic, yeah. And we get to, you know, and the kids who were in our house always come back for, you know, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and, you know, school vacation, which is awesome.
So what made you reach out? How many years ago was it that you started with Essentia?
It was like 3.5 years ago. We've had, 3.5.
What made you say, I'm going to pick up the phone and we're going to take in some kids?
Oh, it's all Debbie's fault.
Your partner? Oh, she's not here. That's
she's not here.
fair.
Right. But you know, I mean, it's something that we really did talk about, because you know, I'm in my 50s. Deb's in her early 60s. We were at a stage in our lives where, you know, we both work full time. So. But we did feel like we really wanted to give back, and we both need to keep working full time. So that's why we work with older girls. Or we at first really wanted boys, but we ended up with girls,
Which is interesting.
I love them, and you know, I think you have kind of. I had a very romantic idea of what this was going to be like. And then, like Colleen was saying, you know, you go through this long 6-month period of being vetted and trained, and then it happens. And right after we got our license, we were placed right away. And
So these kids show up at your house?
I mean, they, you know, and you get a little time to, you know, meet the kid, and the kid gets to decide whether they feel it's a right fit, and we get to decide if we think it's a right fit, and you know, you just dive in, and it's the things that you don't really realize how challenged the language issue is for the kid, and so much frustration kind of like can come out of that. Because there's also
I imagine that.
Like a tremendous amount of anxiety of how things are going to unfold. And
what about did any of them come? Well, you're saying 2 of them came from overseas, but one
Right.
came through.
Right. Yeah. Well, I
From
think they
Central
all
America.
come from very complicated pasts. So, and there's definitely, traumatic situations that have happened. But with any kid, you have to let you feel as a parent or foster parent that, oh, I'm gonna give this kid so much, but it takes time for them to really trust you, and that really is a long process.
Even though they're dying to get to the U.S.
They're but
scared.
it takes time for them to understand that there are also rules and expectations, and a lot of these kids aren't used to being home at a certain time, or having the responsibility of a key or communicating and stuff like that. So those are things that definitely you work on over time to.
And they all speak different languages when they came in, too, right?
That's right.
So how, what, you receive financial help from Essentia.
Right. So there's I think it's 26 or 27 a day per kid. Mm-hmm. So the way Debbie and I set it up is there's a separate account that is the kids.
Yep.
And food money comes out of that, and going to the movies or any kind of extracurricular activity we do as a family comes out of that. I don't think all this is not mandatory. We when the kids are in the home for the first 6 months, we do give them an allowance, especially if they're not old enough to work or if they're not able to work.
But that's not out of your own pocket, or is it?
No,
it doesn't have to be. Right.
We take it out of whatever that 26, whatever that, and it's just so they have a little spending money.
Yep.
Like $10 a week or whatever. I mean that's to also help them understand how to use money. Each of the kids get a clothing allowance.
Okay.
Before each season. And then they have to keep the receipts on that and show them to their caseworker. Again, sort of prepping them how to manage money.
I mean, just imagine, I would think, if we can, sorry to interrupt you for a minute, but if everyone listening could just think about, what if you were dropped, no matter how much you wanted to leave your current situation, you were dropped in a foreign country, you couldn't speak the language, again, I think some of them are romantic, that the U.S., what's in the U.S. is romanticized on their end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously what's here is probably better than what they have, but they might have this, it's going to be, I'm going to go, I'm going to get a job, make $1 million and be the next,
Right.
and be a model or whatever it is. But what do you think, what would be your advice to people that are on the edge that may be listening and they may have a relative that is thinking about fostering and they're going back and forth like you said you did?
Reach out to Essentia, reach out to Colleen, and Debbie and I are more than willing to talk to anybody who's interested in getting involved in this and sort of, talking about the reality of it. What's incredible about this program is the partnership that Essentia does with the parents. So you really are partnering with Essentia and the caseworkers to get these kids to a place where they need to be.
So the kid has a caseworker, you have a caseworker.
Right.
Okay.
So you're not really doing it all alone. You have to reach out and keep those communications going. But it's an amazing program, and it's an amazing feeling to be able to connect with these kids, and they become lifelong bonds.
Yeah, because what's interesting, too, is I've read that some people have relatives here, but the reason that it's hard to track the data is because the relatives may be undocumented. And they don't want to say, hey, yeah, I'll take my child and then put myself at risk.
Right.
So, I just want to thank everyone for being here today, because I've learned an incredible amount of information from listening to you, from reading the data, and really understanding what these kids go through. And, I know there's lots of joys and tears for foster parents, but they're in need of foster parents. And if you're at all thinking about it, there's so many heartwarming stories that have come out of this. And I just want to thank everyone for being here. Essentia has been helping these kids. I want to thank Alicia Donovan, Colleen Schroth, and Alyssa Bongiorno. That's an easy one to remember. from Essentia Care Alliance. Alyssa is not. She's a foster parent or with the organization. Thank you all so much for coming in. Essentia has been helping these kids as Ailish said in the beginning, for more than 40 years. And please, if you're interested in finding out about how to become a foster parent, a foster family, or to really make a positive impact in the life of a child coming to the U.S. with hope, they just have hope. Please visit Essentia Care Alliance's website at
It's essentria.org/URM.
Can they just go to essentria.org, which is
They
we will
can.
put on our website ASCENTRIA, Essentria, pretty much as it sounds, ASC.org.
Yes.
And then they will find the refugee children unaccompanied minors program. So I hope people have had a good takeaway from this conversation. And again, kudos to Alyssa for taking on these kids. And again, to Ailish and Colleen for the great work that you do at Essentia. That's Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green. Have a wonderful day.